I'm Mitch Horowitz, the author of Occult America, which is a history of supernatural religion in the United States. And among the things I do is the Occult New York walking tour. I take people all around different sites of occult and supernatural interest in Manhattan, places that help shape the revolution in alternative spirituality that swept the world in the 20th century. New York City was an epicenter of occult activity starting in the mid-19th century, primarily because an area of central New York State called the Burned Over District, which basically exists between Buffalo and Albany, was an incredible scene of religious and social innovation in the first generation of the 1800s. And a stream of relatively liberal New Englanders flowed into central New York State, and they left behind their churches, their family ties, their community traditions, and they took to just a wide array of new religious movements. In particular, there was a movement called spiritualism that involved seances, mediumship, talking to the dead. It swept the nation, but it existed with particular vigor in New York, where there were powerful people like the newspaper editor Horace Greeley, who were advocates of spiritualism. This was a vital part of New York's religious life, and in a sense, New York exported spiritualism to the rest of the world. On a very quiet side street in the neighborhood of Murray Hill on East 35th Street is a church and a courtyard called the New York New Church. It's a Swedenborgian church based on the ideas of a Swedish mystic and scientist named Emanuel Swedenborg. It's also a spiritualist church. There's a spiritualist congregation which meets there, holds seances there each Sunday evening. It became a gathering place for everybody in New York City who had spiritually avant-garde ideas. And it remains an active, up and running church today. There was an occult movement called the Mighty I Am, which was started by a Chicago couple in the 1930s named Guy and Edna Ballard. They combined occult ideas with ultra-patriotism. They drew upon ideas that came out of the Theosophy movement, which was an occult movement that grew up here in New York City before it branched out around the world. And Guy and Edna Ballard, this Chicago couple who founded the movement, said they were in touch with hidden ascended masters. But it had a strange wrinkle to it. In addition to its occult and esoteric belief system, it was also an ultra-nationalist movement. And on the eve of the Second World War, the federal government began to get very concerned about some of these right-wing occult sects that existed in the United States. And they went after the I Am movement on charges of mail fraud. But one of their temples still exists here in New York on East 35th Street. It has a small plaque out front with two American flags extended from the building, and it is a vestige of a movement that swept this nation and also gave the New Age one of its favorite concepts, which was this idea of ascended masters, these unseen spiritual beings who can guide the paths of ordinary humans. Basically, Guy and Edna Ballard, to some extent, laid part of the template for New Age spirituality in this country. Something that surprises people about the walking tour is that we actually trek through some of what are considered the most pedestrian and ordinary neighborhoods in New York City, from the Flatiron District up through Midtown Manhattan, up through the Theater District and Hell's Kitchen. And there's a real reason for that. We've kind of been conditioned to think of Greenwich Village as home to New York's avant-garde life back in the day. But the fact is, Midtown Manhattan was cow pasture up through the mid-19th century. If there was a lodge or an alternative religion or an avant-garde organization that wanted to make a home for itself in New York City, that's where the cheap land was. It's just that simple. You find the spiritualist churches and the lodges lining some of the busiest Midtown Manhattan streets that are walked up and down today by thousands of people who have no idea that any of this stuff is there. And some of the organizations that set down roots there, from the Theosophical Society to the I Am movement to different spiritualist churches, are still functioning today.